Greetings and salutations, shoppers, and welcome to the Crystal Lake Gift Shop. This is Mr. Venom welcoming you to one of our first timely reopenings. We didn't take 2 months off this time. We actually have a little bit of a lull in our podcast scheduling, so we thought we'd go ahead and get another episode in before the end of February. So before we get into it, let's go ahead and introduce the rest of the staff. Of course, your store manager is Mr. Mike Maryman. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well. Your intro lasted just long enough for the helicopter flying overhead to get out of the vicinity.
Cosmic, my friends, cosmic. All right, and of course, our head cashier, it is the lovely Miss Lacy Lou. How you doing, Lacy?
I am doing good, ready to take y'all money.
Nice. Did you like that? I made you the head cashier now.
Yes, I like having a promotion.
Nice. Very cool. All right, folks. Well, as you all know, of course, this is the Crystal Lake Gift Shop where we discuss all things Friday the 13th, the series. Of course, this is episode number 7, so we will be looking at episode number 7 of the series, which is titled Dr. Jack. This episode originally aired on November 9th, 1987. It has a runtime of 46 minutes. Currently sitting on a 6.7 on IMDb, which is pretty high for a Friday the 13th episode. Let's see if we agree with the consensus. Our synopsis for this episode is as follows. Mickey, Ryan, and Jack track down a cursed scalpel that has found its way into the hands of a talented surgeon. Nice, easy, quick description. I like it. So I guess without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our general thoughts. Let's see, this episode, let's go ahead and start with Mike. Mike, why don't you go ahead and jump in here, give us a little bit of your general thoughts about Dr. Jack.
All right, so I just finished the episode not too long ago, so these thoughts are pretty fresh. This mostly takes place in a hospital, like a one single setting. Something I've learned just from our revisit of the series is it doesn't really take that much for them to trick people into thinking like they work there or like are an expert. Like they just kind of strolled into the hospital and like started talking to people as if they were like actually doctors and employees. So that was kind of funny. I will say I felt this episode was kind of light on like the cursed object playing like a major role. We obviously get in the opening a little bit of action with it, and we get the understanding of how it works, how it's being used. But then there's kind of like a lull for like most of the rest of the episode of it even being used. It does make like a couple appearances just to remind us, hey, this is the actual object that they're after. They also kind of throw in an interesting little subplot with another character that's trying to get her own revenge on like the mad surgeon or doctor. And then we almost get a completely different cursed object that's not really cursed object with the almighty powerful defibrillator at the end that I've never seen one that powerful, but it gave us like a pretty interesting and funny kill there to kind of cap off our main storyline there. So overall, I found the episode entertaining. I'm because we go so we spend a little time between each episode. Sometimes I forget, like, is the amount that the cursed object was relevant and used in this episode like more or less than the other episodes we've seen so far. So I'll probably have you guys chime in on that. But yeah, it was a pretty good episode. Probably like middle of the road so far, though. Not one of my more favorite ones, so I'll leave it there for now.
All right. Before Lacy goes, I'm going to go ahead and jump in here because I have a lot to say about my general thoughts. I'm going to be a little bit different than Mike and actually say I love this episode. I legitimately enjoyed this episode. Now, the episode has problems, which we'll get into, obviously. Pacing, first and foremost, is kind of a weird issue with this episode. But whereas Mike didn't like the lack of the cursed object, I actually did enjoy it because we get the cursed object, and unlike last episode, we actually get a little bit more backstory on the cursed item. We understand more so how this thing works, how it became cursed. Now, folks, I am a big fan of the paranormal. I do a lot of like my own paranormal research, not ghost investigations, but like a lot of reading and things like that. And what I've discovered is that there are two major ways to curse an object. The first and more obvious of the two is to actually actively curse it with an incantation or a spell or something like that, where you actually take the object, you perform some kind of ritual, and then the object becomes cursed. Now, the other way for an object to become cursed is if it's a normal run-of-the-mill everyday object, like nothing evil about it whatsoever, but then it's used in evil deeds. And when we get the backstory of our scalpel in this one, it makes 100% sense how this thing is cursed because of who owned it before and the atrocities that person performed with this thing. So I found it pretty interesting that this episode, more than any other in the series, actually brings in a lot of real world facts, which I can't really get into now. It might be a little bit of a spoiler, but I mean, we'll be talking about it pretty in depth during our walkthrough anyway. But yeah, I really, really like this episode. Like, the way that I talked about how the Great Montarro was a very grounded episode, I find this one to be even more grounded than the Great Montarro. Because don't forget, with the Great Montarro, the cursed object was the Houdin box, which was made of fucking marble. So the logistics of moving that thing from place to place is just insane. Whereas this episode, it's just a scalpel. It's a very easily concealable and hideable weapon that you can carry on you and do what you need to do. So like that sense of reality really worked for me. This doctor, our surgeon himself, Dr. Howlett, just his attitude, it's a very realistic, organic attitude in the sense that he's been showered with so much praise and acclaim that it's just now gone to his head, and he puts himself above everyone else. And that attitude is just perfectly set for this specific cursed object. Now, back to Mike's point about the lack of the cursed object in the episode, I liked it a lot because of the moral dilemma that Mike kind of alluded to in the episode, where we actually have, a situation with Jack and our surgeon. And when the surgeon realizes in the scene that we're talking about what's going on, he has to make a decision. Do I do my job, or do I ruin my reputation so that I can get away with murder? Like, it's a great little moral dilemma that has very little to do with the scalpel itself. I will question, though, how that last surgery went through, considering he didn't quote unquote recharge the knife the way he was supposed to. But again, suspension of disbelief, so I'll let it go. One more thing that I have to praise this episode for, as stupid as it is, I gotta praise it. The first end of episode joke that actually made me laugh. I can't believe it. It was actually, I'm not going to say that it was drop dead funny or side splitting by any stretch of the imagination, but compared to every other end of episode joke that they've told in this series, this one actually made me chuckle. It fit the episode. It just, it totally worked for me. I also got to say that Ryan and Mickey weren't just abhorrent in this episode. I mean, one of my biggest complaints about this series is the relationship between Mickey and Ryan and their constant bickering and everything else. And in this episode, we still get a little bit of the back and forth between the cousins, but for the most part, they're a fairly solid team. They work together. They do what they need to do. Ryan actually is able to, like Mike said, the fact that these people are able to sneak into a hospital, and just walk in, not even sneak in, walk in, act like they work there. Everyone around them just accepts it. I mean, there's one scene in this episode where Ryan literally walks into a surgery prep area without a mask mask on. So everyone is looking at him. Not one person questions who he is, what he's doing there. It's kind of hysterical, actually. But again, it's only a 46-minute episode in this case. So obviously you got to get through the story quick. Some elements are going to be kind of glossed over, unfortunately. And in this episode, what was glossed over was just the use of the cursed object. We don't get to see him go through the trend of killing and then going to surgery, killing and then going to surgery. It's like he does it once in the episode, and we then as the audience have to be savvy enough to understand what's happening, how the knife or how the scalpel works and everything else. So yeah, for whatever it's worth, I will say though that this episode ends with one of the worst fights I've ever fucking seen. Like the fight between Ryan and Dr. Howlett is so laughably bad. But again, this isn't an action series, so I'm not looking for Jackie Chan style fighting necessarily. But even Walker Texas Ranger would be better than this. But yeah, this fight at the end, it's like I literally laughed from beginning to end of that entire fight. Just these two little wormy white guys trying to get the better of each other. It's kind of interesting. So overall, I really, really enjoyed this episode. I think I enjoyed it maybe slightly more than the Great Montarro, which would now make Dr. Jack my second favorite episode of this series behind, The Inheritance, our first episode. But yeah, I had a really good time with this one. I thought the performances were all, pretty well done. Dr. Howlett, all of the people around Dr. Howlett, even our vigilante. I thought our vigilante was very organic and believable. Overall, really, really enjoyed this episode. It definitely earned its high rating on IMDb. So I'll leave my general thoughts at that and turn it over to the lovely Miss Lacy Lou and ask her what she thought of Dr. Jack.
Dr. Jack. Jack is back. This was something. I thought we were going to get a little bit more like of the magical scalpel when we see that opening and it just ripped through a fucking steel fence. We didn't get a whole lot more of that. I was like, wow, that's one powerful scalpel. And, it can obviously do a lot of shit, so I don't know like why he chose what he did. But I'm not the biggest fan of, the Jack the Ripper stories or interpretations of them. It just doesn't interest me. It's like literally like my least favorite Johnny Depp movie, From Hell. If anybody's seen it, I fucking like I literally hate it. I don't know. But there was some fun to be had in this episode. The fight, I know you said that was probably my favorite part though. Like when Ryan gets knocked the fuck out and when Ryan gets knocked the fuck out and he just has like that little trail of blood like on his lip and it's up to Mickey to save his ass again. It just had, I'd be remiss if I don't mention a Scream reference here. So it just reminded me of like, I was like, oh, is she going to electrocute his head like Jill Roberts in Scream 4? But no, instead we get something much better, I think, because she electrocutes the scalpel. It is the graphics of the electrocution process is like so, oh God, like, what am I, like, the resurrection of Jason in, what was it, part 6?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes, it's very over the top.
Yeah, I actually looked up, not recently, but like maybe last year sometime, I actually looked up information about that effect, the electricity effect. Apparently, that was something that was demanded by studios, both TV and movie studios back in the day, because they didn't think that audiences would be savvy enough to know what was happening without it. Especially in the 70s and 80s, not everybody knew what a defibrillator was. Now, for the most part, we kind of do. Most people kind of know what it is. We've seen it on television and in movies and everything else. So it's the kind of thing where directors back, in the 70s and 80s, when they would have to do an electrocution, they couldn't just add a sound effect and just have the subject like, shiver, shake, shimmy, whatever, to emulate getting electrocuted. Because like I said, producers and studios didn't think that audiences were savvy enough. So if they did that exact same scene today, that silly little crackling lightning effect wouldn't appear. It would just be a sound effect, and then, the subject kind of, shivering like they're getting electrocuted. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the right thing. Like, I think that we would have been savvy enough in the 70s and 80s to know that they're getting electrocuted. But I guess the general consensus among studio executives was that audiences aren't ultra smart. So you kind of have to, hold their hand a little bit. Hence the electrocution lines. So yeah, just to give a quick explanation on that. It's a dumb explanation, but it was the best I could find in my research.
That's like kind of semi-offensive as a viewer.
Yes. Yes, very much.
Like, I don't even know if that's semi. I think that's just plain offensive. But I mean, like, I guess, like, with marketing back in the day, like, you have to tell yourself it's only a movie, like, but I don't mind that, like, they're hyping it up, but, like, when you have to, like, dumb something down, but, like, I actually don't mind it because, like, it's of the time. Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me of Popcorn a little bit too, like with the electrocution or the first episode of Tales from the Crypt, so it's definitely of its time, and it was just reminiscent of that for me. So I did enjoy that ending. I was like, oh my God, are we going to lose Jack?
Right?
And it's just funny that his name is Jack, Dr. Jack, Jack the Ripper. So many Jacks here. I think the Mike's reference of the vigilante was pretty spot on. My favorite moment had to be like when she's like laying in the hospital bed and Jack comes in and just like starts asking her fucking questions and he's just asking her questions like, and she's like, and he like won't give her like an answer, and she was like, "You're gonna help me get out of here." He goes, "Not yet," and then he just like walks out, and she goes, "You're one of them. You're helping him." And it was just like, well, Jack could have just like, obviously she knew that he was like a fucking killer. He could have told her, like what was going on, but he literally just ends up walking out. I don't know. The episode was okay. It was like a bad episode of ER and Grey's Anatomy with Jack the Ripper. But yeah, it was my favorite episode, but there was some fun to be had with it for sure.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm actually I'm going to say that I'm the complete opposite of Lacy when it comes to Jack the Ripper. I absolutely adore Jack the Ripper stories. I'm not saying that I love every single movie, but we're not talking about movies. I'm not bringing the cinematic Jack the Ripper into this. I'm talking about the man himself, the real world acts. I don't know what podcast it was, but on one of my other podcasts, I actually mentioned that I did a thesis on Jack the Ripper and multiple theories of who Jack the Ripper actually was. So I kind of found it. Anytime I hear Jack the Ripper's name mentioned, my ears instantly perk up and I start to pay attention. I will totally admit that I am biased for this episode over, something like the Great Montarro, which, Mike and Lacy seem to have both enjoyed more. I definitely lean towards this one a little bit more because of the Jack the Ripper element, because I like the cursed object so much better. But I do agree with Lacy in the sense that they don't use it. They didn't portray its power enough, because it's true. The first time we see that scalpel being used, he's cutting through a steel gate, not even like a chain link fence, like a gate with steel poles, vertical poles, and like literally cuts through them like they're butter. So it would have been interesting to see a little bit more of that. I mean, we do get a little bit more later in the episode when he cuts a gun in half. But ultimately, yeah, with a scalpel that can do that much, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of it. But despite, as I said earlier, despite the fact that we don't see as much of the knife, I still really like this episode because just the drama between Dr. Howlett and Jack and Ryan and Mickey just works so much better for me here than, say, the drama last week with, the Great Montarro and his daughter and everybody else. So, again, not to take anything away from that episode, I praised that episode last week. But like I said, for whatever reason, this one just kind of works for me. So I guess I will turn it over to my host to see if there's anything they want to add before we get into the walkthrough. Can't imagine it'll be a very long walkthrough. It's a quick, very simple story. But yeah, Mike, Lacy, anything else to add before we get into it?
I would just say that, it's not that I don't find the Jack the Ripper stuff interesting. I just don't think there's been like an interpretation of it that has really gravitated my attention.
I was going to say maybe another reason why this episode is kind of middle of the pack for me, because I really didn't find the Doctor character all that like interesting. He felt like kind of like a generic villain to me. Not that like an evil mad Doctor couldn't be interesting, but in this one, like I almost was more interested in the woman who wanted revenge, like in that story, like more of that, because that kind of threw in like another wrench to the episode, giving it like a whole entire subplot that I almost wanted to get more background and information on. The Doctor and the way the scalpel, it makes sense why he would have a cursed scalpel, but I don't know. I just felt like,
well,
it was just,
there are holes in the plot because, like, how does the Doctor, like, how did he find out that this knife did it? Usually with these cursed objects, they're either stolen, like, somebody figures out what they do and they'll steal it from its previous owner, or the current owner will die and somebody will take it, things like that. Somebody with previous knowledge. With this one, it seems like he just bought it from that knife shop. Because if the knife shop owner knew what that knife was and what it could do, I don't think he would have sold it. I think he would have kept it. So that's just one of the many plot holes in the episode, is how the hell did the Doctor even find out that the scalpel does what it does? So, yeah, there's still plot holes in here. But, for the most part, like I said, I still kind of enjoyed it. Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I was going to be pretty, but I mean, you kind of covered that plot hole too. Like, I guess like if he thought it looked cool and then somehow accidentally discovered its power, but like even that,
yeah, I'm thinking, you know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking that he bought the scalpel because he thought it looked cool. He probably used it in surgery and lost the patient. You know what I mean? They probably died in surgery. And then the next time that he used the scalpel, he performed some miracle that he never in a million years thought he could do. And then maybe, like I said, it's a long shot, but maybe he started to put, the pieces together that, oh, I killed one person with the scalpel, and then the very next person I used the scalpel on, miraculously survived their, impossible surgery. So obviously, we don't get any hints of that in the episode, but
speaking of the knife shop, I did like that scene. I thought the owner of the knife shop was a nice dick character, where like he was suspicious and about everything. And I did think it was funny when they're like, "Oh, you sold a knife? Give us the name of," as if like you just volunteer that information to like a random person that comes to the shop. Yeah, I need a listing of your customers' names. Like, no, we're not going to do that.
Well, if you threaten to send pictures to his parole officer that might get him sent back to jail, he might be a little bit more accommodating.
Yeah, once blackmail enters the picture, that changes.
Exactly. All right, folks, let's go ahead and get into this one. This is, of course, Dr. Jack, episode 7. Our episode opens with a strange, dark figure walking around alleys. We see, like, homeless people, a fruit vendor, a flower vendor, just like, your standard poor neighborhood. He's walking around. Finally, he runs into a florist, one of those, street vendor florists. He sees that the customer before him tried to buy flowers with a $20 bill. And the florist basically tells the guy, "What do you think I am, a bank? I don't have change for a 20." So he goes away. The mysterious figure then walks up to the florist and hands him a $100 bill. Now, this time, instead of the florist getting all pissy about it, he basically says, "Oh, I'm going to have to get change for you for this." But then a breeze goes by, blows the $100 bill out of his hand. We see the florist go running after the $100 bill, and then we see the mysterious figure pull the scalpel out of his pocket, out of a leather case that he has it kept in. He ends up walking up to the florist and unceremoniously slitting his throat with, I don't know, the little tiny blood spatter that we got. Like, I rewound it to try, because obviously it's not CGI, it's 1987, but it didn't look right to me. And, I'm sure it was a squib pack or something, but they shot it so quickly. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say it's like a half a second long. The shot of a little spurt of blood is literally about a half a second long. So anyway, unfortunately, there's a witness. There's multiple witnesses. There's at least 2 or 3 people that see that he attacks the florist. He ends up trying to run away, but then ends up getting to a gated off area that he's trapped in. The gate is way too tall to climb. So that's when he takes the scalpel and literally, like a goddamn superhero, just swings it twice, cutting multiple bars off of the gate and then being able to go through. And that's the end of our cold open. The next morning, a news article about a florist being killed with a small knife catches Jack's attention because the killer was said to have had made a getaway by slicing through iron bars with a small knife. Jack looks through the manifest and he finds that there is a 19th century scalpel that was rumored to have belonged to Jack the Ripper. Yes, so now you understand why we're all referencing Jack the Ripper. This scalpel, it's rumored. I mean, obviously it can't be proven, but it is rumored to have belonged to Jack the Ripper. They find out through the manifest that it was sold to someone named Jim Morgan, an ex-con who now owns a knife shop. Because what else would an ex-con do? Anyway, Jack, Mickey, and Ryan go to the knife shop to pay Morgan a visit. They start to question him, but he insists that he doesn't sell scalpels until Mickey actually trips him up. She actually says, "Oh, here it is. I found the scalpel that we're looking for right here." And then Jim says, "What? That can't be right. I sold." And then he realizes what he said. He stops himself. Jack instantly is like, "Hey, look, I'm not here to start any trouble, but I do have these film negatives here from a certain event from back in 1979. Mind you, this episode aired in 1987, so 1979 is not that much removed from this." And Jack basically says, "Well, maybe your parole officer would be interested in seeing these pictures." And then instantly Jim just says, okay, I sold a scalpel about 2 years ago. Of course, Jack and the gang ask if they know who he sold it to, and he lets them know he sold it to Dr. Vincent Howlett. Now, Mickey and Ryan don't react, but Jack instantly is like, "Whoa, you sold it to Dr. Howlett?" And of course, the knife shop owner, Jim, is, he's concerned that, that information might get out and that it could, reflect negatively on him. Nothing really comes of that. Jack and Mickey and Ryan end up leaving. They go outside and they basically Jack informs Mickey and Ryan that Dr. Howlett is actually this world famous doctor. He's a doctor who performs miracle procedures that should be impossible, but somehow he does it and he never ever loses a patient. He's, supposedly has this great record. So Howlett, like I said, who's a superstar of surgery, basically has a conversation with his former doctor, who is not former doctor, former instructor, former medical professor, who is now the chief of surgery at the local hospital where Dr. Howlett grew up. So Dr. Price, this is a female doctor. She's now the chief of surgery. She has brought Dr. Howlett into the hospital because this hospital has a terrible reputation. They lose patients, just, different things go wrong. Dr. Price talks about multiple things that has been flagged at the hospital. So basically the hospital's on the brink of being closed. So Dr. Price decides to bring in Dr. Howlett. But of course, despite this, Price still doesn't trust Howlett. She needs him, but she doesn't trust him. The hospital being buried under bad press, malpractice lawsuits, outdated equipment, and they even mention some minor scandals. They don't say specifically what the scandals are, but they just say some minor scandals. So, figure what that can be. At this point, Mickey, Ryan, and Jack wander around the hospital looking for Howlett. Someone else is looking for Howlett too, a middle-aged woman, and she has a gun. When she finds Howlett, she pulls a gun out of her purse, trying to shoot him. Ryan, though, who's also at the hospital, turns the corner, sees that she's pointing a gun at Howlett, and she stops her. She instantly is taken, and this is a weird situation because the woman wasn't arrested. She was literally just taken by hospital staff and taken to the mental ward. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not legal. Who the fuck decided to do that? But anyway, they take the gun and the woman's possessions away from her. They take her to a room in the mental ward and they pretty much shackle her to a bed. They handcuff her to a bed. Later on, as we kind of mentioned, Jack does visit her. This is where we find out who she is. As it turns out, her daughter was murdered years ago, and it's almost implied that her daughter may be the first victim of this doctor, because she said that after that, suddenly he became a world famous doctor performing all this surgery. So maybe he killed the daughter in like a heat of passion, and then realized later that if you quote unquote, charge up the knife, that you can do miraculous things with it. Who knows? So at one point, Mickey ends up following Howlett back to his office where he's playing with his scalpel. She ends up knocking on the door and walking into his office, pretending to be a member of the courtesy staff there at the hospital. Basically asks him, if there's anything you ever need, please let me know. She notices that he's got the scalpel in his hand. When she ends up leaving his office, she goes and finds Jack and Ryan, lets them know that, hey, he's got the scalpel in it. It's in his office. So what they decide to do, Jack goes to the waiting room. Ryan then follows the doctor. Dr. Howlett leaves his office and goes to a restricted area of the hospital. There's actually a sign there that says, "Stop, no personnel allowed," like literally no one allowed. So why is there an unlocked door? Your guess is as good as mine. Like I said, Ryan ends up following him down to this, kind of dilapidated part of the hospital where he sees the doctor go to a locker and start to put on a very familiar overcoat. It is, of course, the overcoat from the mysterious figure during our cold open. Ryan, in his infinite stupidity, ends up falling over a bucket that he was standing on to try to look over a fence area. Dr. Howlett hears it, and then they make chase. Dr. Howlett starts chasing Ryan around with the knife. I'm wondering why the hell he's even running. I mean, yes, this blade can cut through steel, but it's still a middle-aged man who doesn't look like he's in the greatest of shape. It's like you would think Ryan would be able to take him, but nope, Ryan decides to run. Eventually, Jack ends up joining the fray, and Ryan ends up getting separated from Jack and Dr. Howlett. Jack and Dr. Howlett end up getting into a fight near an open elevator shaft where Dr. Howlett basically is able to push Jack into the elevator shaft, but Jack is able to hold on to the cables, the elevator cables there. So he's holding on to them, but of course, Dr. Howlett is holding a knife that can cut through steel. So what does he do? Of course, he cuts the cables. Jack falls down, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 flights. Like, it's not like he fell down 10 flights or anything, because when Mickey and Ryan go to the open elevator door, they look down and they can see Jack. He's right there. Like I said, he's maybe 2 or 3 floors below them. So now Jack has a pretty bad injury. Apparently, something happened with the lining of his heart during the fall, or during the landing, maybe. I'm not sure. And sadly, he needs emergency surgery. But the thing is that the surgery that he needs is almost impossible. So they need someone incredibly skilled to do it. So, of course, they call on Dr. Howlett to perform the surgery. Now, when Howlett is asked to perform the surgery, he doesn't know who he's performing it on yet. He just knows that they're asking him to perform an emergency procedure and that the press is already here. Because this would be one of the first procedures that Dr. Howlett does now that he's returned to the hospital, the press is there, because don't forget, this guy's like a world famous miracle worker, surgeon. So with the press already being there and the patient already prepped and ready to go, he basically can't say no. Dr. Price even says it in so many words. This is exactly why I brought you back here. I need you to perform this procedure. So Dr. Howlett asks, what time is the surgery? Dr. Price tells him it's going to be at 8:30. I'm not sure what time it currently is, but Dr. Howlett basically decides, okay, that should give me enough time. So he agrees to do the surgery, and then we see him leave the hospital. Of course, he ends up going back to his normal stomping grounds around the park and the alley areas around the park. He ends up finding a prostitute, or at least we assume she's a prostitute, because she's a fairly scantily clad dressed woman who's kind of smiling at the doctor for no particular reason. So, but this is where the doctor is an idiot. rather than talk to her, try to engage her first and then go somewhere privately where he can then use the knife, this dipshit pulls the knife out of his pocket when he's still like 12 feet away from her. So, of course, she sees the scalpel in his hand and she runs into a bar that's right there. There's like an open bar right there. So she just runs into the bar and now she's safe. And the doctor, at that exact moment, the doctor gets a page from the hospital pretty much demanding that he get back to the hospital right away because he's going to be late. So remember, folks, he doesn't actually get to kill anyone to quote unquote charge the knife. He ends up just going back to the hospital, getting admonished by Dr. Price for being late. Then he washes up. Now, this is a weird scene right here. If I know anything about doctors and surgeons, they can't just walk around with their scalpels. Their scalpels have to be sanitized and steamed before the surgery, and usually they're laid flat on a clean surface. I don't know what hospital would let a doctor walk around with his own scalpel and let him be responsible for the cleaning of it. But again, whatever, suspension of disbelief. So when he gets to the hospital, he gets to the surgery prep room. He has the scalpel in his hand. He puts it down on the side of the sink where he's about to wash his hands. He goes to wash his hands, and then Dr. Price starts talking to him, continuing to admonish him for being late. We see another doctor on the other side of Dr. Howlett with the face mask on, grab the knife and walk out of the room. And I'm thinking, holy shit, did a surgeon just see that and think it was cool and stole it? No, my friends. As it turns out, it's Ryan, and he basically infiltrated the surgery prep room. This scene makes sense because, like I said, he's wearing a face mask, so you can't tell who he is. He takes the knife and he walks out. Instantly, Dr. Howlett notices that the scalpel is missing, starts making a scene, basically saying he can't do the surgery if he doesn't have his scalpel. Dr. Price is admonishing him for, like, what's the big deal? It's just a scalpel. We have thousands of scalpels, Eventually, Mickey and Ryan lets Mickey know that he's got the scalpel and that they can leave. Let's get out of here. Let's take the scalpel back to the vault. This is when Mickey then informs Ryan about Jack's condition, that, his heart had some kind of issue with its lining due to the fall down the elevator shaft, and that basically it's usually a death sentence. This particular injury is usually a death sentence, but because they have the miracle worker, Dr. Howlett, at the hospital, they decide to prep Jack for surgery. So, like I said, at this point, Dr. Howlett still doesn't know who he's operating on. Literally, Mickey tells Ryan, you got to put the knife back. You have to give him his knife back. It kind of makes sense and it doesn't make sense. After we're done with the walkthrough, I'll talk about why this scene is kind of wishy-washy a little bit. Because it seems like Jack wouldn't want them to let the doctor use that knife. And there's episodes later on in the series, which I'll reference, where Jack would admonish Ryan and Mickey for using a cursed object. Because there are going to be times when Mickey and Ryan will actually use these cursed objects themselves. Not necessarily for some kind of benefit, a personal benefit, but maybe just to use it against the antagonist or whatever. And in every case, Jack would admonish them. In this case, I guess not. And I understand that, the doctor using his magic scalpel is going to be the only person who can save Jack, but it still does seem hypocritical that Jack later on gets mad at them for using cursed objects, but then he doesn't get mad at them here for allowing a villain to use a cursed object, even if he was using it for good. It's kind of a weird gray area for the series, but, we'll get into it. Did you want to add something, Mike?
I was just going to say, because if he's already a surgeon, then, you would assume, even if he had to do the surgery with a regular scalpel, it would most likely be okay. Because I forgot, did they say exactly what the surgery he was getting was?
It was something about the lining of the wall of his heart. Something about the lining was damaged when he fell and landed in that elevator shaft. And that usually that injury is death,
Yeah.
To an extent, I understand why Mickey told Ryan to put the knife back, because obviously if it's the only way that they're going to save Jack, especially this early in the series, I guess I have to take that into account too. The fact that the series is so early, Mickey and Ryan still aren't, how can I put it? They're still not ultra comfortable with their lot in life and what they have to do with the store to the point that they could do it without Jack, in other words. So to an extent, I understand why Mickey made the decision that she made of telling Ryan to give the guy back his knife. And then this is the ridiculous scene one of the ridiculous scenes that Mike was talking about. At this point, Ryan, with no face mask on, walks back into the surgery prep room and just hands Dr. Howlett his scalpel. He's like, "Oh, Dr. Howlett, I think this belongs to you." Howlett doesn't even question how the fuck he got the scalpel. Howlett knows that he put it down on the side of the bathroom sink and then it disappeared. And then here's this guy that he doesn't recognize handing it back to him. It's like, really? You're not even going to fucking question it? But again, whatever. We only got 46 minutes, so we got to keep going. The surgery begins. For the first part of the surgery, Jack's face is covered. So Dr. Howlett still doesn't know who he's operating on. He just knows that he's operating on someone trying to save their life. Potentially, he's the only person who could do it. Well, about halfway through the surgery, one of the nurses moves the towel that's on Jack's face, exposing his face to the doctor. And then instantly you see Dr. Howlett's expression change. He's like, "Oh, shit." And this is the moral dilemma. Do I save this guy knowing that he can rat me out as a murderer because he's literally just going to say, "Dr. Howlett pushed me down an elevator shaft"? And most people are, the cops at the very least are going to have to investigate. Or do you let Jack die on the operating table in front of about a dozen press, members of the press who are there to do an article about you and your miracle work specifically? It's a very crazy catch-22. Let Jack die and ruin your reputation, or save Jack and potentially lose your freedom. So what ends up happening is Dr. Howlett completes the surgery. But then after the surgery is over, he goes to Dr. Price, was it Dr. Price, or maybe it was one of the nurses. And he basically says, "Okay, I want to handle that patient's post-op meds myself." So obviously we know what's happening here. Dr. Howlett's going to try to take Jack out before he can say anything. He ends up walking into Jack's room. Literally, he pulls out the scalpel. Rather than trying to stab Jack, he decides that he's going to separate his breathing tube. Like he's going to cut the breathing tube, which, I don't know, in his infinite wisdom, I guess he thought he could get away with that more than just stabbing him with the scalpel. So as he's about to cut the breathing tube that's connected to Jack, the vigilante walks in. The woman, whose daughter was killed by Dr. Howlett. She's there. She got her gun back. She was able to basically sneak into the nurse's station, break into the locker, get all her possessions back, including her gun. This hospital is so fucking stupid. A woman walks in with a gun. They don't call the police, and they don't even get rid of the gun. They fucking leave it with her personal possessions. Oh my God. Anyway, she ends up stealing all her possessions back. She ends up finding Dr. Howlett in the room just as he's about to cut Jack's breathing tube, and she stops him. And then she introduces herself because obviously Dr. Howlett doesn't know who she is. And she says, "You killed my daughter, you son of a bitch. I'm going to stop you. This ends today." And then the doctor, well, again, the stupidity of characters in these episodes, I can't really forgive it. But the doctor ends up telling the woman, "Oh, well, don't shoot me from way over there. You might miss. Why don't you come a little bit closer?" And in her infinite stupidity, she does exactly that. She ends up walking close enough to the doctor that she's within arm's reach of the doctor. The doctor swings with the scalpel and cuts her fucking gun in half. I thought that was actually pretty cool. Stupid. Like I said, it's like I don't understand the mentality of people. Like, why would you do what he tells you to do? He's, just fucking shoot him. Just fucking, you've got 6 bullets in that thing, right? Shoot the first couple from distance and then take a couple of steps forward and make sure the last couple don't miss. It's so fucking simple. But no, the gun gets cut in half. He then takes a swipe at the woman, cuts her on her arm, doesn't actually kill her or cut her arm off or anything, just gives her a slice. And then Ryan then gives chase, and Mickey. So Ryan and Mickey then start chasing the doctor. This time the doctor's running away rather than staying and, defending himself with the knife in his hand. He's literally running away, trying to get away. Finally, Ryan is able to catch up with the doctor. We have one of the most ridiculous fights. I mean, the punches that were thrown like they were thrown by a mentally challenged marmoset. Oh my God, it was the worst fucking fight I think I've ever seen. I'm sure I've seen worse. It's hyperbole, obviously, but my God, like I said, I'm just laughing this entire fight. Like, what the fuck am I watching? And then finally, the doctor ends up knocking Ryan out, and he goes to approach Ryan with the scalpel. Mickey ends up, grabbing his attention, hitting him with something, and then she notices a defibrillator right there next to her. She turns the defibrillator on, grabs the paddles, and hides them behind her back. As the doctor starts to approach her, he's having his little villain monologue like all idiot villains do. And then as he walks up to her, she takes the two paddles, puts them on either side of his hand, the hand that's holding the scalpel, and basically electrocutes him. Now, it's not the electrocution that kills him, because as we find out, after they turn his body over, he fell on his scalpel. So the electrocution from the defibrillator basically knocked him down, but he had his scalpel in his hand, and he fell right on his scalpel, killing him instantly. So yeah, Dr. Howlett has now been dispatched. And we are back at Curious Goods for our closing scene. We see Jack in a wheelchair. He tries to get up multiple times, but Mickey and Ryan tell him, no, you're going to stay in that chair, and if you need something, we'll get it for you. And then we actually finally get a joke that actually made me chuckle, where Jack basically laments all the people that Dr. Howlett unalived, if you will. All the people that he murdered, basically, feeling sad for the people that have died at the hands of Dr. Howlett to advance his surgical career. And then Mickey says, hey, look on the bright side. At least you won't get a bill for the surgery. I'm sorry, folks. That made me laugh. I know it's a dad joke, but it's a petty joke because the guy is dead now. So it worked for me. So, and that's the end of our episode, friends. That is Dr. Jack, 1987, episode 7 of the Friday the 13th series. And man, just talking about it made me really highlight a lot of the shortcomings of the episode. I still love this episode. I genuinely do. Ultimately, every episode of Friday the 13th is going to have a shortcoming in some way, shape, or form. I don't think you're ever going to see like a 10 out of 10 episode out of this series, but these grounded in reality episodes, I just really like. Not a lot of effects, not a lot of special effects. Not a lot, no monsters, no demons, things like that. So overall, pretty much everything I said about the Great Montarro last episode kind of holds true for this one, at least for me personally. Now, as far as some facts about the episode, I was reading some reviews for this episode, and it's funny because a lot of people seem to have a problem with this episode. A lot of like Friday the 13th, the series aficionados don't like this episode. And one of the things they talk about for why they don't like this episode is kind of the weak writing of the episode. Well, guess what? There's a story behind that, and here it is. Basically, this episode, Dr. Jack, was the first episode written by story consultant Mark Scott Zachary. And this is one of the first things he ever wrote under his name. He used to do like ghostwriting, screenwriting in the past, but this episode of this series is one of the first things that he actually put his real name on. Now, what happened was Zachary agreed to write the script, but he had a time constraint. Unfortunately, very sad, his mother died right after he got the assignment. And his mother was basically his rock. She basically was everything to him, but basically it crushed him. He was destroyed, and he actually wanted to walk away from the series. But one of the show producers, Barbara Sachs, who actually is a producer for Paramount specifically, basically gave him some very terrible advice. Basically said, hey, look, if you write the script, you'll feel better and it'll take your mind off your mom. Well, as it turns out, it did not. And Mark had a lot of problems trying to write this. He had a time constraint. He had to write this episode in like less than 5 days while still dealing with the death of his mother, funeral arrangements, taking care of all her personal possessions. Like literally, when you work in Hollywood, your life can't stop for any reason. And, sadly, that's what happened. So the quote I have here from Mark is, Dr. Jack is going to be shooting and the machine was rolling. Barbara Sachs said to me that I've got to write the script. She said, well, you'll feel better and it'll take your mind off of it, which was incredibly insensitive on her part. She was not a people person. I was devastated by my mother's death, but unfortunately, I am a professional writer. I had that muscle memory in me. So I was able to just sit down and write the episode. I'm not proud of the episode. It's one of the weakest things I've ever written, but because of my mother's death, because of the emotions I was going through, and because of the time constraints, I basically had to turn in something. So that's kind of, anybody out there who has any issues with the pacing of this episode, the story, the writing, the dialogue, there's your reason. It's hard to work in Hollywood, especially when you actually have a life outside of Hollywood. Because, as I've already said, your Hollywood life can't pause. Unless there's a writer's strike or some kind of a SAG strike or something like that, you have to work in Hollywood. And it doesn't matter what's happening in your life. If something really bad, like the death of a family member happens, you got to work through it. And the only other option would be to quit. You just have to quit your job. And in Hollywood, if you quit a ready-made assignment, you might end up getting blacklisted. You may not get another job after that. It's one of the terrible truths of Hollywood. I've seen it firsthand. So, and then the last thing that Zachary wrote, that Mark Zachary talked about with this episode, is that he didn't actually write the title for this one. The title for this was already picked out. But he hadn't obviously he hadn't written it yet. So he didn't know that this was going to be a Jack the Ripper story. When he saw the title Dr. Jack, he thought it was going to be about Jack, our main character, Jack Marshak. But then the producers let him know that, oh, no, it's a scalpel that belonged to Jack the Ripper. So that's why it's called Dr. Jack, because of the real world theories that Jack the Ripper was actually a surgeon, a royal surgeon, no less. That was one of the major theories, that Jack the Ripper was a surgeon for the Queen, hence why he got away with all his crimes, because he worked for the Queen. So, no one's going to prosecute. Yeah, that's it, folks. That is our episode. Mike, Lacy, anything else you want to add before we get out of here?
I think you did a really good recap this time around. Sometimes it's easy to picture when you're going through the motions of it. Just recap, when you were talking about Mickey and how she hid it behind her back, and it's just it brings up an interesting point. We've seen it done on movies, of how to turn one of those things on, but do you think Mickey would actually know how to turn one of those things on?
Well, the button that she hit actually was labeled power, which isn't accurate to real life. Anybody who knows how to use a defibrillator wouldn't need every single button on there labeled, because they know what they're for. But in this particular one, somebody decided to label it power. So I guess that was their way of saying this is how Mickey, a common citizen, would know how to turn this on. Like I said, it's a guess, but that's my guess.
That's fair.
Mike, anything else?
Not really. I got nothing. I did think that I do agree that the joke at the end was actually decent this time.
Yeah. I'm not going to say it's, like I said, it's not side splitting by any stretch, but just compared to all the first ones that we've gotten, this one actually made me chuckle. And, that's a lot, especially at the end of a Friday the 13th episode where you're almost always frustrated with, our main characters. To actually get a joke that actually made me laugh was a minor miracle. Ha! No pun intended. Mm-hmm. All right, folks. Well, this is your 10-minute warning. Please bring your final purchases up to the front. The store will be closing in 10 minutes. While we do that, let's go ahead and let the people know where else we can be heard. So, Miss Lacy Lou, let folks know where else they can hear you.
The Cut to the Chase feed, where I have Cut to the Chase. We just released our top 10 of 2024, which is not just horror, across all genres. If you are just a movie aficionado, we picked the best of the entire year. I think it was like ended up half being horror, I think. I know a lot of people probably don't agree with our number ones, but I don't care because I really liked my number one. And if you want to know what that is, go fucking listen to it. Also, the Slumber Party Massacre, I just dropped My Bloody Valentine OG commentary. That was a lot of fun, and we'll be coming back with some movies next month for a regular episode. And I think the last 20 will be resurrected here soon, probably after I move, just because I've been super busy. But yeah, and then some Full House commentaries will be dropping soon as well, so check those out. Oh, we did a review of Baby Girl with Nicole Kidman, me and Zach Nelson, who joined me for a Full House commentary, and it is fucking hilarious and probably TMI, so check that
out. Awesome.
Is that one already out?
The Baby Girl one?
Yeah.
No, so I have one episode. We recorded 2, so one will be dropping after Valentine's Day, and then I'll probably drop them back to back. They'll probably be Monday and Tuesday.
Okay, cool. As far as I go, latest episode of Fresh Cuts is out. Hard Eyes was our latest one, correct? Yeah, yep. It is. So if you want to hear our thoughts on that Valentine's Day themed horror movie, go check that out in the usual places. And then the only other thing is the main show. What was it? Episode 63, I think, or actually 64. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's been out a couple of weeks, but since we only do this show like monthly, it is, I guess, considered new to promote here. So check that out. We talked Cruising and The Clairvoyant, kind of under the umbrella of American Giallo, although that's debatable always. So go get our thoughts on those movies and all the other stuff we talked about on that show. And that's it for me.
All right. And then for me, obviously, everything that Mike already talked about includes myself. And then I can add the other show on the network. And that is, of course, No More Room in Hell presents Creature Comforts. Our latest episode is episode 34, where we look at our first animated feature. That is Batman, the Doom That Came to Gotham. Why are we doing a Batman movie on a creature feature podcast? Well, my friends, the Doom That Came to Gotham is basically Batman in the Lovecraft universe. Basically takes place in the 1920s. So a lot of steampunk fashions and things like that. And of course, just lots of tentacle creatures and one particular elder god that does make an appearance. But yeah, check out that episode. That was a fun one. Anyone who knows me knows I adore H.P. Lovecraft. So I had a lot to say on that episode. So check that one out. And I think that's it. On the next episode of Creature Comforts, I'm going to make a little announcement here. The next 2 episodes of Creature Comforts are going to be in correspondence with the main show. So on our next main show, No More Room in Hell, episode number 65, we're going to be looking at creature feature remakes. We're going to be looking at The Fly, of course, the Jeff Goldblum remake, and then we're also going to be looking at Cat People. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the originals on the next 2 episodes of Creature Comforts. So the next episode of Creature Comforts, which is episode 35, actually records tomorrow, and we're going to be looking at the original Cat People from 1942. And then on the next episode of Creature Comforts, which will be our March episode, we'll be looking at the original The Fly, which I think 1958, maybe, if I remember correctly, somewhere around that time for the original Fly. And then, like I said, we'll be looking at both of those remakes on the next main show of No More Room in Hell. And, of course, you'll probably hear the entire family on those episodes. We'll probably all get together and talk about all these movies so that we can kind of compare and contrast the originals with the remakes. So that should be fun. A little correspondence with some of the other shows under our umbrella. So yeah, looking forward to it. All right, folks. Well, that is it. The store is now closing. Thanks for visiting us today. We'll see you next time. And man, let's hope that the turnaround is as quick as this one was, because I have a giant ear-to-ear grin on my face right now because I'm so happy that we're able to get together a little bit more often and get these episodes out. So, folks, hopefully we'll see you sooner rather than later. On behalf of Lacy Lou and Mike Maryman, I am Mr. Venom, thanking you all so much for joining us, and let's go ahead and say bye to the folks.
Bye, everyone. Go watch Friday the 13th, the remake, because it came out today.
Anniversary.
See ya.